Hello, everybody. I hope you're surviving the pandemic and everybody is healthy and well. And I just want to let you know that I'm doing great. So we haven't been twiddling our thumbs at WitUps for the last year. We've been working on the remote work project. And today I'm going to share the findings on how people have been experiencing remote work over the last year during the pandemic, what we can learn from it, what really matters. Hopefully you've downloaded the slides, and if you want to send a message or ask a question, just join the chat. There's a join the chat button on the live stream. So, let's get going and talk about what's going on with remote work as we understand it. There we go. So here we are, we're right at the nexus, right? Companies are starting to make decisions. How remote will they be? How in person will they be? People are thinking if they're safe, what are they going to do? So the question on the table is, what can we learn from our remote work that we just went through during the pandemic? And of course, we're going to take a little attitude towards diverse teams and what impact, or is it relevant in one way or another for women. So let's take a look at what we did. We started the remote work project in June of 2020. Again, a combination of survey and deep dive field interviews. And so a total of 51 people worldwide, multiple genders, race, ethnicity, marital status, family, etc. Mostly more women than anything else. And so all of this data taken together was organized and was very consistent with each other. And so I'm going to share that data and those results and some of our conclusions or some challenges for you today. Before we start, I want to give you a little bit of perspective on remote work, because we've been remote working for a really long time. There's been global teams. They've been doing remote work. People are in different locations within their company. They've been doing remote work, and people have been studying it. And so there's two takeaways I want you to keep in mind today that we found out before we entered this in the pandemic. First, remote work impacts negatively team collaboration. There's less team cohesion, there's less connection, there's less dynamic collaboration with each other, okay? If you've got two co-located teams, but they're going to be in remote with each other, they tend to identify more with their local team and not with the larger team as a whole. They don't, really connect to them. But overall, if the team has a very strong goal, it is if they have a very strong goal, if they have a lot of processes, if they have leadership, then they can be more productive. Okay, so that's what we want to keep in mind. All right. Now, the second thing we want to keep in mind is that all remote technology, from the beginning of just sending us emails back and forth for collaboration or discussion groups or simultaneous voice and now video, all remote technology reduces the interpersonal cues that you would otherwise have in a face-to-face meeting. And this means that we are more prone to miscommunication. We don't have the nonverbal cues as well intact. We don't, get to be clued in before somebody says something to us. And unfortunately, there is increased stereotyping. In other words, it is harder to get to know you as a unique individual, particularly when it's a new person joining the team. And so we tend to think more in terms of that person is a girl, this person is heavy, this is an old person, right? And we respond to them through our biases. Whereas if we're in person, we can actually get to know you. You will, your uniqueness will shine forth. The second piece we want to think about, as I just turned off the video of myself, is that when we see ourselves in a video, we start to think about ourselves. So it's like looking in a mirror and we pay too much attention. Do you like my necklace? Is it in the right place? does my, how am I looking? And so we want to be our best self. So that's a two-edged sword, because if we want to be our best self and we're looking in our own face, if we start behaving badly, we see ourselves behaving badly. And at the same time, we become so self-conscious that we just can't focus and talk. So these two things we found before we started in the pandemic, and yes, they have played out in the data that I'm going to share today. So let's get started. But before we do that, I want to thank all of my volunteers. All the work at WitUps is done by volunteers. And for this team, we had a set of professional people helping us. And we also had students from the University of Maryland. And of course, we had to work remotely in order to do this work. So thank you to all of them for the hard work that you have done over the course of this year. And as always, to one of my partners in crime, Nicola Marston, who backs me up, and I back her up on all the things that we're doing. So let's get into the findings and implications. We've got 3 sections, one on connection, one on running ourselves, and yes, interpersonal dynamics. So let's talk about connection and its impact on work. So we're social people. No matter how introverted we are, we're social people. And one of the big things we lost when we all went remote is that sense of local community, the ease of making friends. And even if we weren't working with the people, one of my favorite stories is about this woman. She is a product owner in a global team, but she sat with other product owners. She sat with other people working on different products, and they became friends. They shared their experiences. They shared their life. They went on walks together. They had lunch. They had coffee. While she was working remote, she didn't have any of that. She was surrounded by 3 children, 3 dogs, and her husband, and she was lonely. And she was lonely for the sense of work community, which is one of the draws that we have to wanting to go to the workplace. It isn't just about getting stuff done. So now we don't have that easy way of getting to know people. Interactions are highly structured. They are planned. We are going from one, if you would, Zoom or Microsoft meeting to another. And even though we instituted chat, social chat at the beginning of meetings in some places, it's not the same as talking before a meeting or after a meeting or in the hall or any of those kinds of things. And to our credit, we tried to do it, right? People report they'd have social meetups or coffee or lunch or whatever that people could come to. And what people have told us as well, those kind of peter out, that it's not productive. And so they aren't going. And they are also group oriented. And I want you to keep in mind the idea of the difference between something being group oriented and the opportunity for one-on-one interaction. And of course, yes, we had the large social events or the big, design party or whatever for a day that you might have done in some cool location in the past. And we tried to redo it. But none of this, it might be fun, is really actually helping us connect socially. So, chit chat and meet in the front of the meeting did help. For example, for some global teams, you learned about their culture, or we started to see kids from managers, and we found out you had pets, and we talked a little bit about your interests. But then that social chat can also start leaking into the meeting and become distracting. And so what we found is that social connection, real relationship, occurs through one-on-one interactions. It helps me get to know you for real. You'd have to be in some context in which we were going to have some kind of video meeting with each other one-on-one, probably to do work. And then as is always the case, when you work one-on-one, you'll talk a little bit about life and you'll talk also about work. But the idea of setting up 20 minutes in order to just drop in and find out how you're doing, for example, the person we were talking about before, in the course of a year and a half, one time talked to one of those women she used to sit with, and she felt that she was wasting time, that she was stealing time from the company, because the company is not sanctioning spending time just to catch up with each other or get to know each other. Now, this turns out to be really bad for new hires because new hires don't know anyone, whether they're new hire leaders, people out of school, whatever they are, they don't know anyone. And so they need a way to get to know people. And remote doesn't make it easy for them. All right. But perhaps my most, I don't know, profound finding that we came to, and not really surprising, but like very impactful, is that without spontaneous informal interaction, without sitting together and leaning over to get each other's help, without dropping in, without talking in the hall, without coordinating first thing in the morning informally, the work suffers. We lost all our informal interaction, and we lost the kind of collaboration and especially information exchange that occurs in that context. One woman we talked to was a content designer, but also in charge of multiple websites, okay, in a university. And she told the story of how she has to okay and make plans for any of the content going up. So in the past, people would drop in, they would talk to her. Well, on one occasion, she's in a big meeting because we have a lot of meetings with lots of people, okay? And she finds out that one of these guys is making a video, but she never talked to him about it. They didn't figure out the time, how long it would be. They didn't figure out the topic. They didn't have any plans whatsoever, and he's off doing his thing on his own with no collaboration. In the past, he would have dropped by. And so in the course of talking about this, she's like, yeah, he would drop by and we would start with chit chat. And then he would tell me what he's doing. And then we would talk about, oh, really, it has to be, a minute long. It can't be 4 minutes long. And then I would run over and I would see what he was doing. She didn't realize that without an informal way of interacting, she lost all kinds of information and ended up being all mad and pissed off at everybody. This was happening in story after story after story. We couldn't give light touch nags to people to remind them to get things done. We didn't informally learn what other groups were doing. Over and over, we were losing collaboration. And that, of course, always impacts the quality of the work that we have. Now, Slack, chat, whatever you are using, try to replace it, but Slack is not dropping in. Yes, people reported being able to ask a quick question. They could see who's busy. But of course, if you're busy all day because you're in lots and lots of meetings, then you can't ask a quick question like, can you set up a one-on-one? And we also heard that in some organizations, because of their rules, not everybody was on the Slack. Well, if everyone's not on the Slack, then you can't get to everyone. So this type of thing, Slack, is not replacing dropping in. And unfortunately, productivity, quality, cohesion is lost because people don't want to reach out, as I said, and set up a meeting for the purpose of catching up. It's now a formal meeting. It's now in your calendar. You have to make all that effort. And as a new hire, you're surely not going to do that to make sure that you can talk with one another. And the other side of it is people who used to collaborate in a co-located way by leaning over each other's desk and helping them out with a problem, stopped doing that. Everyone was alone. Everyone was isolated. And the result was more bugs in the system because they weren't helping each other out. Or a new hire who thought, I could figure this out. Oh, I don't want to bother anybody. Didn't reach out for help. Made major errors in the code that she was writing. So I want us to just keep in mind that we need to work face-to-face, or we need to build in a way for informal interaction and sanction it as real work. Another really interesting piece is, if I don't know your style, if I really don't know you, it's really hard to work with you. Now, if I knew you before, I learned all about you, and so it can feel like the collaboration is working. There were a lot of people that were new. New leaders came on board, whether from the same company or a brand new hire. New team members joined. People we talked to were new hires. But if we only see you in a group, If a leader chooses to speak to the group as a whole and doesn't take the time to get to know each person in the group, then the people working there don't know how to approach them, what's appropriate, what's going on. Face-to-face interactions used to help everyone, even remote global teams, get to know each other. One woman who was in Manila and was managing teams in 3 other locations felt like she couldn't really connect. And she was supposed to be managing the work of these, they were vendors, okay? In the past, they would have flown to the 3 different places. She would have met every individual person. They'd have worked together for 3 days. She'd learn their style. New hires complain about not understanding the culture of the team because they're not able to learn what's really going on with the individual members. And again, but if they work one-on-one, then they can learn their style. And then the work can get done more efficiently, more effectively, and with more confidence. If one of the new hires talked to us about how, she doesn't want to go to office hours. She has to put herself forward. She might ask a dumb question. She would rather have a one-on-one with her manager to figure out what's going on. And of course, one question leads to the next question. So people need to know each other's style to effectively collaborate remotely, and we have to build that in. So taken together, remote work is simply undermining quality work, group cohesion, a sense of belonging, work critical communication, and new hire integration. We're not saying the work didn't get done. We're saying it's not the same as working together. And we're challenging you. If you're going to be an all remote company, if you're going to work with others remotely, you got to think about these things, and you have to start designing solutions to get more one-on-one interactions and to get more loose time. All right, so that leads us to, let's talk about running ourselves. How do we run ourselves? Well, we're doing the same stuff. We do the same stuff that we did when we were face-to-face. We have the same meetings, managers have the same responsibilities, but now it's all remote. So what happens? Well, our collaborative tools are great. We can do things we've never been able to do before. You still have to learn them. They're not as fast. That's absolutely the case. But what happens to the workday? Well, one of the things that's happening is that people have turned everything into meetings. And so you could start your meeting, especially if you're a global team on some time zone, whatever, 6 in the morning, and be in one meeting after the next meeting, after the next meeting, after the next meeting all day. There's certainly no time in there to talk about informal interaction or chat before and after the meeting. In addition to that, meetings can feel long, they can feel time wasting. If they don't know if they have to go, it might be irrelevant to them. There could be technical glitches. They could end up, one woman talked about how she had to be in meetings from 9 a.m. to 2:30 in which she had to listen and participate in no way. Okay, I don't know about you, that would be terrible if I was in a face-to-face meeting to start out with, but that sounds really horrible if you're Zooming. Can you really pay attention? And so the center of the way we run ourselves is inside of meetings. That's what happened when we're remote. Now, it was also the case when we were working face-to-face, but not to such an extent. And so what we saw was a very big change in the way meetings were run. Whereas we've been recommending more structure for years in meetings, what we find is that people have started to take on structure and structured meetings when they are in remote meetings, because if you don't, they really don't work. Meetings without an agenda, without a clear purpose, without anyone to make sure things stayed on track, devolve just into chaos. And so we started to see people putting in on purpose agendas, checking agendas with each other, prioritizing what could fit in the meeting, soliciting input, and then prioritizing before they get into the meeting, adopting more structured ways of interacting. And of course, if you're a Scrum team, Scrum in this case serves you well because stand-up meetings, retrospectives, these all have rules and rules of engagement. And so that's easier to do when you are remote. The other thing we saw consistently, and of course that we have seen even before this in in-person meetings, is that a shared document that's basically guiding and capturing the results of the conversation is essential. If everyone cannot see the same thing at the same time, they get lost. They get confused. And so people, even when they had a collaborative tool, let's say Miro board, and you were sharing a design, they would still share it on the screen in order to indicate exactly where we are. So a shared document was always recommended for guiding the discussion, but if you're in a remote meeting, it's absolutely essential. So as we move to increase structure, I want you to encourage you to do that more and more, because structure is good for having good meetings, but structure is also good for women in diverse teams. Everyone knows what to do. They know the rules of engagement, and they also have some structure around participation. And we started to see more participation structure and the need for structure in how people talk as we studied what was going on over the course of the last year. People were talking all over each other. It was chaos. Hand raising doesn't really exactly work. People are people. They start talking over each other. So we saw teams institute round robin sharing. Well, round robin sharing is great for people who have a hard time speaking up, whether that's a newcomer or whether that's somebody who, is a little bit nervous because they're from a diverse, underrepresented population. One team used a randomizer to decide who would go first. That's another great way to equalize talk. Or the manager would call on people and so control participation. We also found that, as we said before, that participation could get out of control. If you start chatty in a meeting, right, and there isn't a real start now, that can, start taking up way too much time in the meeting. And now you have to, people are like, oh, we're going to be impolite. We have to stop these people from talking. So push towards managing participation was another trend we saw in how we run ourselves. Now, on the other side, somebody who's speaking like me, they care about whether anyone's paying attention. And so they're monitoring it. And people figure out, well, if you're asking questions, you're paying attention. But over time, less questions means people aren't really taking it in. Or if you're having camera off, and we're going to talk more about camera on and camera off, and people start hearing key clicks, or even if you just have your camera off, people assume or can assume that if they're presenting, you're multitasking. And of course, if you're in 6 hours of back-to-back listen-only meetings, well, you probably are multitasking. Another really interesting finding is that people change their participation. So now everyone is alone. Everyone is in their own little square. Their entire presence to the team has to do with what they do in a meeting. And so people are talking more. Their participation is public. They talk more than they ever did when they used to be in a co-located team. Because in a co-located team, when you're doing the work, everybody knows about the work that you're doing. They already know what your work is. But when everyone is isolated in their own little square, nobody knows the work you're doing. So people start talking more, which elongates the meeting. Another thing that happened is before, people would talk over their ideas in preparation for a meeting. And we found stories in which people, well, they didn't do that. And they didn't maybe even know they did that because they were co-located. And so instead, the meeting gets chaotic because now the two people that needed to get on the same page have to work it out in the meeting, talking across everybody else to figure out what it is that they were going to say to this person over here that they were sharing directions to. Or it gets so chaotic, people just shut down. They don't ask for clarification. So remote requires participation structure, and it also requires some planning of who needs to collaborate before they get in a larger group meeting so that that meeting itself will work. Now, of course, to run ourselves, we have to collaborate. That's, you know, said, and we are using, as I said, the collaborative tools. People do have to learn them. They do have to adjust. It depends on, if you would, the tech savviness of your overall organization. And yes, we will run some large collaborative group meetings. Things like training, brainstorming, design critiques. Again, want to recommend the kinds of structure we've been recommending for a long time. But what people find is, well, look, if everyone's co-located, that kind of group collaboration and brainstorming creative meeting works. If everyone's remote and you put in enough structure, it works. But if some people are remote and some people are co-located, that doesn't work. Well, guess what? It never worked. It never worked. We might have pretended that one person who's remote is really participating in this co-located bunch of people, but that never worked. And so I'm going to be pushing you to be thinking about, if one person's remote, we have our tools now, let's make everyone remote. And I'm going up my slide in the opposite order because I want to come down to what I still think is the most important point. Collaboration between pairs and very small groups over a collaborative artifact, that's what works. It works best when we keep it small. Whether we're co-designing an organization, a design, a slideshow, looking at code, if we keep it small, if we listen to each other, as one very senior person was great, she put up her design of an organization and then through a series of questions with a less experienced person in an organization she was trying to help redesign their organization, they could talk about what their resource needs were. She could document it as she went. As long as it's small, we can hear each other. So collaboration works best when it's just a few of us and we can get to know each other at the same time and we can exchange that kind of informal information that we need. And I must say something about new hires, and you're going to hear me say this a number of times, but one of our questions was, is our team onboarding checklist, does it work, for remote? Are the needs the same? What's going on? And the answer is a resounding yes. It is the same, but now it's a remote challenge. You have to shift things. But new hires need support. They need quick access to people for questions. They need to understand the culture. They need coaching and encouragement. They need somebody to partner with on the work, one-on-one. And they will not reach out. They didn't reach out before. They didn't reach out for help. They didn't reach out to get to know people. Our best practice is that you set these things up. They're too self-conscious. So, time and time again, we talk to the new hires working remote. They feel isolated. They feel like an outsider. They feel like they don't know where they stand. So please, managers and teams, reach out for one-on-ones frequently and take a look at the team onboarding checklist to help you. So remote needs structure. Excuse me. It needs a focusing artifact. This is just good meeting process, leadership, a mission, an agenda, and it's good for diverse teams. And if we're going to do remote stuff in the future, or if you're going to be all remote, remote can equalize power. It can ensure everyone is heard if everyone's remote. So I highly suggest that if you're going to have anyone remote for that meeting, make everyone remote. All right. I haven't coughed all day, and now in the middle of this, I'm coughing. Let's talk about interpersonal dynamics. Now, if you've been following any of our stuff, we did the Valuing and Jerk project, that we care about how people treat each other and that people care about how they are treated. So interpersonal dynamics are gone, right? Everyone's alone, working alone. The question on the table is, well, what happens? What happened to the valuing and jerk behaviors? What happens in the world of the interpersonal? Well, in our survey stats, we asked a question. I observed more valuing, or I observed more jerk behavior since being remote. And as you can see, and this is followed up with our qualitative data. People are not any more valuing, they are more tolerant of all the machinations of the pandemic and what people need to do. But in terms of valuing your skill, your, who you are, all of the dimensions of valuing, they're, about the same. And in terms of jerk behavior, no, people are not more jerky. And we'll talk about this in a moment. Valuing matters. The Valuing and Jerk Project tells you exactly the kind of valuing that people need. We need to simply do it. If we look at the remote findings, people need manager support, they need coaching, they need championing of themselves, of their work, and of their career. And the stories we heard is, I know my manager wants to support me, but no, they're not doing anything. I don't know how we can get these things to happen. There's less coaching and support. They want coworkers to follow their lead, ask them questions, etc. That's valuing, but not if your video is off and you're key clicking, right? They want to be known personally. They want you to take time with them. But we don't encourage that when we're remote, at least we haven't for the last year. Admittedly, we've had enormous pressure, fear, and everything else. On the other hand, there's no reason we can't do this. And we did see some increase in, increase in the functionality in the Zooms and in the Teams. We got more emojis. We can, send hearts and claps and little notes, and that's all good. So if you become a valuing culture, you can do it if you're remote, but you have to do it. So go take a look at what that valuing behavior is. And, what about jerks? Okay, the reality is jerks are still jerks. So people were jerks before, guess what? They're still jerks later. If jerk behavior happened before in your organization and it was tolerated and nobody stomped on it, well, then it's not surprising that it's going to happen when you go remote. It might be a little bit more difficult to do, right? But it still happened. Not a lot, but it still did. So, what are people talking about? No, do not yell. Do not talk in a harsh tone. Do not belittle other people's skills in a group. There was nothing more horrifying than the story of a designer presenting results in a public group with a VP in the room, known for not being so nice, in which he just lit into her, saying that her ideas were ridiculous, that her designs were terrible, right in front of everybody, right? I mean, you could visibly see that she was upset, okay? This behavior is unacceptable. It's unacceptable when we're in person, and it is surely unacceptable when we are remote. Now, the team responded, and it was very interesting. I have this in a bullet later on, but I'll tell the story here, because they saw what was going on. Everyone is staring at everyone else's face. And so they would send little supportive notes to her during the meeting. They actually sent notes back and forth to each other, trying to figure out who should say what to try to intervene. And eventually, a more senior person just stopped the meeting, just took it over and ended it. And then people had to deal with the fallout. But jerk behavior is still jerk behavior. If you devalue my capability, my job, as I said, one woman was very upset because this guy just thought her doing her job was an imposition on him, and what she wanted him to do was busy work that some low-level person should do, not him. And so she had to intervene in order to get him to do it with another manager. But that doesn't make her feel good about the work, and she was a new hire. And if you don't listen to my ideas, if ideas are dismissed, then that is devaluing, and that still happened, okay? Now, what we did find that I want you to pay attention to is if video is off, even if you're getting criticism from a valued manager, as was the case with one of our developer new hires, it comes like it's coming out of nowhere. And this was from several people, like, boom, I didn't see your reaction to the work. I didn't see your face. I couldn't even see it coming. And this isn't even from anyone doing jerk behavior necessarily. So it feels harsh, it feels loud, it feels like a negative push, it feels rejecting. If we're going to give criticism, either do it in an organized critique meeting with structure, but whatever you do, keep that camera on. And so if we take a look at these negative interactions, people were doing things, as I said, just to remind you, to minimize or stop them. I talked about the colleagues sending notes and intervening and a manager intervening, but another wonderful solution, because people were in a retrospective meeting and they're just spending all their time blaming each other for everything that went wrong. Well, this isn't really the rules of the retrospective. So they intervened. How did they do it? They gave the meeting structure. They used a new tool. The tool structured everything. It ensured that personal attacks could not happen. People would put their comments in individually, not by going around the room. Then they could sort them, they could look at them, and they could have solutions. And people can steer them away from personal attacks. So if we think about the overall behavior, putting in meeting structure is always the best way to deal with devaluing interactions. All right, now let's do this video on, video off. As we said, if you have more cues, you have less misinterpretation. Visual cues help us interpret interactions more accurately, and video on helps interpersonal dynamics. When new hires came on board, everyone turned their video on. If you really want to connect with the team, if you want to meet people, the video needs to be on. And it even needs to be on in one-on-one interactions if you don't know that person well, so that people can get to know each other. We can see their reactions to proposed ideas. We can know when to intervene. Video on, and this is interesting, may equalize power and help people to speak up. Because with video on, it doesn't matter if you're 6'4". You can't tower over me. You can't lean into me with video on, okay? You, even if you're kind of projecting and yelling, it's going to be more muted. And when we were talking to people, they talked about this kind of protection of the screen, that they just somehow felt safer. She felt safer. And also that because everyone had an equal square on the screen, no one had outsized importance to anybody else. So it can equalize power. So I want to recommend to you again, video on. Now, lots of people though had video off. Global teams got used to working with video off. They always did it. And they didn't realize that there's a difference between video off when it's two groups talking to each other, and video off when everyone's all by themselves and they can't read any interpersonal reaction. And so, it wasn't so good. We had a lot of misunderstanding. Now people are turning video off because they want to respect privacy or reduce the appearance demand. People are at home, maybe they're worried about their messiness. But even still, it's not really great for helping to understand what's going on. Another really interesting finding is that if managers turn their video off, everybody else would turn their video off. And one guy tried to, counteract that. He said, well, I'm turning my video on. I'm hoping to encourage other people to turn their video on. So I want to encourage you to have real conversations about video off and video on, and under what circumstances you really need to have it on. And especially when you're getting to know people, especially when you're giving any kind of feedback or critique, because the video on is going to help your team cohesion and it's going to help your communication. So please keep that in mind. So how do we manage our interpersonal relationship? Clear procedures, clear processes, clear rules of engagement, a culture of professionalism and a commitment to really providing value. That's going to mitigate bad behavior. But before we're done, I want to share one of my most interesting, well, I have many interesting findings. We found a number of women who in the remote context worked on finding their own voice. Remote changed the need to speak up. You have to speak up more when you're working remote, or as we said, you have less presence, and you don't have the nonverbals to make things work. So I'm going to just tell you 4 stories, right? Our product owner we talked about before despises interruption. She thinks it's rude. She thinks it's the worst thing you could ever do, except that she was letting, as the leader of the meetings run on and on and on. People were frustrated. They were going off track. Her manager asked her to please consider interrupting and controlling the meeting. So she had to work on her attitude towards interruption and redefine it as her responsibility as a leader to manage the flow of the meeting. And over the course of the beginning of trying to do that, she managed to realize that if she said, got it, we heard it, she could cut off a conversation. If she said, we're going to deal with that in the other meeting, if she said, I think everybody has what they need right now, she could control the flow of the meeting and make sure that they made decisions. And she was then rewarded by the team and her manager for her increased leadership. She needed to speak up in order to manage what was going on. Another woman who worked in a help desk, she was a top tier person, in the trouble ticket system. People would always come to her when she was in person and ask her to do work that wasn't at her level. And she couldn't say no, she didn't want to say no. But she said when she was remote, she got more confidence and she started saying no to work that wasn't hers. She told them to go and ask the right person. She tried to do it in a nice way, but she was proud of herself and nervous that she could say, hey, this is my job. This is the job that I should be doing. You need to get that done. That's great. We'll go ask that person. She could speak up. Another woman we talked to was new. She didn't speak up in the meeting. She's the one that made the big error in her code. And, so she didn't get the big picture. And she started to notice that when the team discussed how they should approach a problem, she would listen to the more experienced people. They'd share their ideas, though they came to the idea, and she'd just say, yeah, whatever you say. And she's realized that if she really wants to be more of a leader or to have confidence in herself, she's got to take a stand. She has to think about the problem. She has to understand the whole problem, and then she can speak her mind. And the last story is the consequence of speaking up if nobody is there to support you. So another woman had in her review, so now it's a big push, right? It's in her review. It said she needed to speak up in meetings more. So she was more of a new hire. She got her courage. She was in a meeting where they were going to redesign a survey they thought needed to be improved. She was a user UX person. She thought she would have a big role. And so she makes a suggestion to change the nature of the questions and how they're presented. And the VP slams her down. He's like, that's stupid. That's a bad idea. This is not the same nasty VP I told you about before. Okay. And he didn't listen to her. So she shut up. So she didn't speak. So she stopped speaking in that meeting. She stopped participating. If you're going to get feedback that you need to speak up, and especially if you're a new hire, the rest of the people you're interacting with have to know that they need to be supported. You don't want to ask somebody to take on what's a challenge to them and then whack them down because, you don't like what they said. So I think it's great that a number of women we talk to are finding their voice. I think if being remote helps that, I think it's worth thinking about, right? But let's remember that we need to support them as they are trying these things out, or as anybody who is trying to find their voice is trying things out. So if we just bring those two interpersonal pieces together, realize remote work changes the interpersonal demands and the interpersonal skills needed. It is also an opportunity to become a more valuing culture. All right, so let's wrap it up. Where are we at? Look, remote work has a strong pull. You don't have to commute. You have more time for family or self-care or even for more work. Remote meetings that don't require participation let you multitask. You can fit those home chores in on a break. You can go walk the dog, right? Remote work, people can live wherever they want. Remote work gives you more life at home. And I want to stop on our bottom point here. because people became incredibly understanding. People became incredibly flexible in our tech culture. Not necessarily great for families in the world, but in tech culture, babies attended meetings. People understood if women had to run off and breastfeed, they could turn off the camera and be in the meeting anyway. They understood if a father went and walked his kid. They understood that they'd be listening in as they tried to manage childcare. They understood that they had to work off hours because people were managing the kids, little kids' schooling. I have stories of them ending the meetings by 4 o'clock, ending the day by 5, so that people could have their family time and if they needed to jump back in later. We did a lot of what we call non-judgmental flexibility over the course of the pandemic. And now we're going back. We became more family friendly. And now we're going back. We proved that work could happen. I'm not saying you're not exhausted and burned out and a wreck, okay? But we can't lose this. Don't lose this. We can get the work done, and we can also allow us to have an outside life. So I would be remiss if I didn't make a point of that. But to reinforce our primary points here, remote work undermines connection. It undermines social connection. It is harder to network. How are you going to network it? How are you going to set up those meetings, right? Information exchange is undermined, and subtle influence, having to deliberately reach out to discuss things, to get to know someone, versus dropping in, getting a coffee, bumping into them, right? You know, didn't we do it, right? We knew this person would always go get their coffee at this hour, so we'd go out of our cube and kind of run into them in order to talk. Oh, wow, young people do that all the time. We have lost that. We have to think about it. And so we have lost team cohesion, and we have lost quality in the work. Face-to-face is essential. I'm not saying you have to do it every day. I think 3 days a week is good. 2 days a week is good. If you don't then make back-to-back collaborative meetings all day long, so that there isn't any time for that informal content. But we have to realize that we have to address that problem one way or another. Well, my team, you know, we thought about those things, and one of the things that we also thought about was whether or not the WITOPS interventions work for remote. And as I have said, and I will just reiterate again, please go to our resources section and see the things you can download today, because they all matter. Remote needs more structure in every kind of meeting with clear goals, agendas, procedures. Use structured critique processes with cameras on. Yes, remote needs these things. New hires need everything on the team onboarding checklist, even more so when they are remote. Yes, valuing a jerk behavior matters, and it matters if the videos are off or on. Please go learn about our character posters and a workshop surrounding them, and create a team manifesto or rules of engagement so you can help modulate how people interact. I don't care if you're a small startup or a great big company, every team that's a team needs rules of engagement and an agreed upon way of saying, what kind of team do you want to be? And yes, do help people find their voice, especially underrepresented people. And when they are trying to do that, support them and keep the cameras on. So, key understandings. If we're going to stay remote, if we're going to go remote, we have to become inventive. My team said, well, what if we had a virtual break, a cafe place, where when you take a break, you can get a coffee and hang with someone, or where you can set up a 15, 20-minute touch base in some kind of fun environment. You know, put your beautiful garden out in the back of your screen. But in one way or the other, this is one of the most important things we have to do if we're going to be even more remote. So I want you to take on the challenge of the experiment that we are in. You can do your own research, you can try your own things, but don't forget to address the issues that I've been talking about, and I think you will do well. So jump out there, see our resources, join us, volunteer, Right now, we're going to do a survey, we hope, to follow up on these remote issues, but I need somebody who's a survey expert and a statistician to go with them, or somebody who is both to work with us. So please contact me if you want to work on that kind of thing. I'm not sure what we're going to be doing come the fall, but I wanted to wrap up this year. And a plug for our new book, which we hope the pandemic slowed us down, coming out by the end of the year, that is pulling together our understanding, the at-work experience framework, all the issues, including our remote data, and also our intervention techniques. It'll be there for you, and you can get a sneak peek in our introductory chapter. So that's it. And if you have questions, let me know. Looks like we don't have any questions. So I'm going to say bye. Have fun coming out. Be safe. And please let me know how everything is going. And I'll talk to you and see you soon.